I'm very excited now because for years I've sailed in and out of Plymouth Harbour and you always pass by this squat, forbidding island. It's called Drake's Island, and for generations it's been owned by the British Ministry of Defence. But now it's just gone into private ownership and I've been invited to come on and check it out. Hey Bob, how's it going?
Hi Dan, welcome to Drake's Island.
Oh, thanks for having me. I mean, this is a legend, this place. Everyone in the area has got their stories about Drake Island.
Absolutely.
There's gold buried here, tunnels underneath. Just how militarised is this landscape?
It's extremely militarised, but it was always a case of deterrence works. The first building that we knew about on the island, that was St Michael's Chapel. That's first mentioned in 1135, so that sat right at the very top of the island. That was knocked down in 1550 for the first Tudor fortifications, and that really coincided when we had the first effective cannon. And those cannon had a range of 600 metres, 600 yards if you like, which funnily enough is the distance between here and the Hoe.
Yeah.
14 firing points at various points all around the island, so it's all round defence because you couldn't interlink your arcs with other existing forts around here. And in fact, just round the corner we've got the remains of one of those two 1550 artillery towers. They had 3 military buildings right on top of the island. As Devonport was built in 1720, they collapsed those buildings, started the buildings that are just up there behind us, and put another battery on top of the island because they'd developed howitzers, which is the long arc, as I'm sure you know. The next advance in military technology was in reaction to the world's first ironclad warships being launched in 1859. We then had that further advance when we solved the problem of the gas breach at the rear. So those guns started appearing on the island around about 1895, together with searchlights and other interactions then. But it's always been a military fort in that sense.
The armed forces used it until when?
1963 they finally left, although it was rarely manned at times. We have maximum manning 490 in World War II. First military men on the island were 4 gunners paid for by Edward VI for only 2 years. It was manned relatively regularly during the Age of Empire because Plymouth was one of those ports that was the point of departure for regiments going abroad. So they come to Plymouth, form up while they're waiting for the troop ships, the stores to be got together. So there would be a small infantry detachment between 20 and 90, it varied regiment to regiment, and a battery of about 60 gunners on the island.
So for 400 years, this was a military site?
A military site mainly, but there were other bits involved with it. Back in 1772, before Captain Cook went on his second circumnavigation of the world, we were still trying to solve the problem of longitude. He was taking the first 4 sea chronometers to be tested at the time. And Mr. Richard Bailey from the Royal Greenwich Observatory came down, set up an observatory on the top of the island, took readings up there that played its part in solving that problem of longitude. So it's got much more to it than just the pure military side of life.
Well, let's go and take a look.
Yeah, absolutely, let's go. Okay, so from here we can see actually the oldest part of the island fortification still remaining and the newest build that was built.
Okay.
So if you look right over there, you see what looks
That
like the
wall
end of the
there,
wall. Yeah,
yeah.
that end of the wall. So remember, all the vegetation gone. That's one of the original 2 Tudor artillery towers.
Wow.
So take that vegetation off, wooden platforms on the top, guns on the top, that's what you had there.
Short range cannon, so you want them right on the water's edge. Okay. Yeah.
And here, this is the late 1960s boathouse that was built for the Adventure Training Centre. There would have been a slip down the front here, and although the outer wall looks very old, it's actually recycled stone.
Looks like the Tudors built to last. 60s, not so much.
Exactly, exactly.
So what period is this entranceway?
We think at times it would have gone back to Tudor periods, but as with most of the island, things gets recycled, so stuff gets knocked down, the stones used to rebuild. We think this is probably 1600s to 1700s.
Handsome, isn't it?
Yeah, it's amazing stuff. The first engineer on the island was a guy called Federico Genibelli. He was Elizabeth I's trench master or engineer. And we know he built the first fortifications. There were the 14 batteries or firing points all dotted around the island. And he also built 3 buildings on the top of the island. So that was a gunpowder store, a barracks for 300 for the militia if they were ever deployed, and a general store as well.
And Plymouth was becoming by that stage pretty much the most important naval base in the country.
It's a real highlight of the island's role as a keystone of defence during the English Civil War, because it enabled Plymouth to withstand that 4-year siege. You can get a real feeling for that at one of our viewing platforms on top of the mast.
And so what are these buildings here?
Elements of these buildings start in 1720. So the building right over there, the part that's facing us now, is a barracks for 130. The building here was originally the married quarters for the master gunner and 6 small married quarters.
Are you allowed to bring your wife over if you're stuck
Yeah,
on the island?
certainly. The early censuses, 1861, there were 6 families on the island. The 1871 census shows 13 families on the island.
Not a bad posting. Those all have been ramps, I guess, to get the guns up.
Well, not just the guns, but also the ammunition.
Of course, yeah.
Some of the biggest guns we'll see on the island, the top of the island, the 12-inch, 25-ton guns. A single shell is 272 kilograms. To fire that took 38 kilograms of gunpowder. And we'll see at the top of this rank thick wrought iron rings like this, which are the hauling rings. They used to have a hauling rope on the front of the ammunition basket, which would be on wheels, and they'd obviously pay that through the hauling ring, possibly on a block and tackle, and haul it up. And you can see that just down there, and you'll see a lot of these around the island, all at about ankle level. This granite block here was the original site of the flagpole, probably 1720s-ish. Queen Victoria painted and drew the island both in 1846 and 1852. When you look at those paintings, you'll see a flagpole. That's where it was.
I can't believe they're just gigantic guns just lying around. So Victoria Reginas.
Yeah, these are Armstrong guns.
Yeah.
And the one lying down there, the 32-pounder, you can see the cipher on the top.
This is great.
Yeah, George I, so it's 1750 to 1780 sometime, and a 32-pounder. There's quite a difference between the guns, because these would have been, 4 to 5 man gun crew, reload time 2.5 to 3 minutes. These big guns, 8-man gun crew, 5 minutes to reload.
5 minutes, really?
Yeah, for a well-trained crew. But these guns could punch through 15 inches of steel at a kilometre.
Just shows you the revolution. There's only 100 or so years between that cannon and this one, but look at the technology.
Yeah, so that's raw iron, so that would fail after a certain amount of firings, or potentially. With these two, the rear 2 cylinders are raw iron, but the barrel's steel, so it can take that much bigger charge, and therefore the much greater pressure that produced.
You get a whole view of the Plymouth Sound from up here, and you could traverse right round here and big arc of fire. Yeah.
So yeah, there's a couple of things. So you've got the breakwater out there, you've got Fort Bovysam, Fort Picklecombe and the breakwater fort. So they were the outer defences for Plymouth. This was the first line of the inner defences. Okay, let's go and have a look at the upper level of tunnels, which would have been the forward magazines for these big guys up here. Like I say, it's pretty narrow down here. Yeah, this is one of the original guards, but if you look down there, that's the shaft that goes down to the bottom. So there would have been a chain up to the top. That's on a crank that you'll see down there, and then there's an ammunition basket. And so that's the level of tunnels below us. We'll get to see those in a bit.
They weren't taking any chances, were they? Because that's a long way down. And they must have been worried about incoming shells penetrating to this level.
Well, absolutely. So that 272 kilogram shell will punch through 15 inches of steel at a kilometre. You want your bulk ammunition, bearing in mind it's tons and tons of gunpowder. Yeah. These aren't combined shell cartridge by this stage, these are still separate. They've absolutely got to be at the deepest point of your island, which is why you've got these maze of tunnel.
Let's go have a look then.
Okay, so this is one of the forward magazines as we come in. The bulk ammunition would have come up from the hoist that we've just seen and then be stored in here. Like I say, those guns took 5 minutes to reload. So you would leave your forward shot and shell in here as a bit of extra protection before the gunners took it on the outside to reload. And again, this is another one of those hoists that goes to the top. So again, you can see the remains of the chain link here. Wow. So when we go to explore the top of this battery, you'll see where some of these come out. Because of the size of it, we're guessing this is possibly World War II, because at that stage you definitely had the combined cartridge shell. Although the 12-pounder from World War I also used the combined cartridge shell, whereas the 6-inch you'd still use separate.
So you've got high explosive buried underground where the enemy can't get at it, but they're so heavy you need hoists to get them up to the guns above. And so these are like those things that they have in restaurants and stately homes, those dumb waiters or whatever they're called, the little lifts for food that come
Yeah,
up and down.
I've always favoured calling these dumb gunners.
Dumb gunners, right, brilliant.
So again, you can see areas around here where you had exits. They wouldn't necessarily have steps down them, but if you just come out here, you can see where they would have had a hoist. They could have brought, as the stuff came up from below, trolleys out here, lifted up, again up to the top side. So they were quite ingenious about how they went about everything in here. Another straight lift up to the top. And again, although this is worn out now, it would have had a cartridge lift number, so the gunners would have known, bang, where you're going, where you're putting it up. So that ramp that we came up to go up to the top, this is about halfway down.
Yeah.
And this is where they came out.
That's clever, yeah.
But you can see this was an original wall going back there, and these are your retaining walls coming out. If you come round this way, this brings us halfway up the ramp that we originally walked up to the guns on the top of the island. Yes, that's that battery that leads all the way round. So if we come to the top of the mast, I think you can get a real feeling for how the island was a sentinel for Plymouth until that advance in artillery technology that got the big guns on the island. So you can see up here looking all the way around.
Dominates. You could not get in and out of this port without controlling this island, could you?
Exactly, and really the English Civil War highlights that. So the English Civil War, 1642, the garrison of Plymouth has built its defences to the north.
And they're parliamentarians?
They're parliamentarians.
Yeah.
And the interesting thing was Charles I removed the governor of the island and of Plymouth, Sir Jacob Astley, before hostilities broke out to command all his infantry.
Oh, I see, yeah.
In that power vacuum, the mayor of Plymouth, who was a parliamentarian, appointed Sir Alexander Carew, a parliamentarian, captain of the island.
Big mistake, yeah.
Yeah, so you've got that side of it. So Plymouth is being held by parliamentarians together with the island. You've got two great royalist armies, one under Prince Maurice that's at what's now Mountbatten, stretching round to the north of the town. There's a ridge line up there that kind of stretches Eggbuckland, Widdy Manor, where he had his headquarters, and through to Groundhill. And then you have Prince Rupert over at Mount Edgecombe across there, linking up with Prince Maurice's forces around there. Plymouth was the only parliamentarian town to hold out during the English Civil War, so its population doubled to about 10,000 or so. A lot of disease, it was not easy, but they had just enough supplies, and the key point was holding this island, and the vast bulk of the Navy declared for Parliament. So the parliamentary Navy could come under the guns of St Nicholas Island, as Drake's Island was known then, out of range of the Royalist batteries at Mountbatten and Mount Edgecombe, underneath our guns, into Mill Bay directly opposite, and Plymouth always had just enough ammunition, just enough supplies, just enough men to withstand that siege.
So you mentioned this island hasn't always been called Drake's Island.
When the Royal Engineers Office put tenders in for building works on the island, it was always for works on St Nicholas Island. A bit later on in the 1800s, it would sometimes be St Nicholas stroke Drake's in brackets, but it really seems only to be known as Drake's sort of colloquially from about 1820 on, and certainly when Queen Victoria sketched and painted the island in 1846 and 1852, she labels it Drake's Island.
So next thing you're going to tell me is Drake, one of the most famous sailors in history, son of Devon. You're going to tell me he doesn't have anything to do with this island?
Very, very little. The island's named after him, but Drake died on a sea voyage. He was buried at sea. His body's never been found. But his second in command, Tristan Jorges, named the nearest island, which is off central Panama, Drake's Island. So the original Drake's Island is actually in Panama. It seems to be an element of Victorian rebranding. It was the age of empire. We're renaming, not only us, the French, are renaming places after their famous battles and who we perceive as our greatest sons. And, Drake, with his role in the Armada, is perceived as that. So it seems to be for that reason it was called Drake's.
Is that man-made? Is that a submarine barrier there or something?
Yeah, absolutely. Army, we call them dragon's teeth. They're the anti-tank ones. I think the Navy call them shark's teeth or dolphins. They're reinforced concrete from World War I. In World War II, they would have just been wire gabions filled with heavy rubble. And there was a submarine boom that was first put in 1910 then to close off the rest of the channel at the back of the island.
They threw a sort of cage of steel and concrete around Plymouth, didn't they?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it was absolutely key with Devonport. It was headquarters Western Command during World War II, up until 42, I think it was, when it moved up to Liverpool. So yeah, this was absolutely key as commanding those Atlantic lifelines for that first part of World War II.
So my grandpa was in the Royal Canadian Navy during the Second World War. He always talks about coming to Plymouth, so to think if I'd been standing up here, I'd have seen his ship.
Okay, so this end of the island, the tunnel complex we're going to go through, the casemates we're going to see, was all in reaction to the 1859 Royal Commission on the Defence of the United Kingdom, which is the Palmerston forts in essence. We're going to go in through here. So these are the bulk magazines. So the ones we saw on the top of the island were the forward magazines. This is where they held the bulk, and you can see in there one of the old ammunition trolleys with its wheels missing. Ledges down there holding various bits and pieces, and a vent that goes up to the top of the island. But this is one of three main chambers. Yeah, they're absolutely amazing. So you've got 3 chambers, all interlinked by open arch, which is where they kept the bulk ammunition and gunpowder. And as we come in here, just round onto the left, this is where they had the lighting, because you had your gunpowder in here. This was 1/2 inch thick sheet glass. Right. That was fixed. So the guys would have been able to come in with a lighted wick, stay outside of the ammunition magazine, but still lit an oil lamp that side if needs be. And the guys would have worn canvas uniforms and canvas or Indian moccasin shoes, again to prevent any spark whatsoever.
And there were lots of examples, weren't there, in this period of catastrophic accidents, of magazines getting blown up.
Yeah, exactly. Fortunately, it didn't happen on the island.
Such a dangerous job.
So if we come through here, we'll come into one of the tunnels as well. Again, you can see these little lighting passages that go off to the side. And behind here, if you remember the hoist I showed you at the top of the island, you can see the shaft up there. You can see the pulley there that we saw from the top. That's the hand crank and the chain, and that's your ammunition basket. Just behind you there, you can see another one of those lighting recesses, and you'll see a number of these all around the place.
It goes to show the astonishing investment in military infrastructure in the UK at the height of empire.
Yeah.
Places like Portsmouth and Plymouth being surrounded by forts like this.
Yeah. But the irony is, these were built to counteract the threat from the Emperor Louis Napoleon, Bonaparte's nephew. These weren't complete until 1871, and they're known as the Palmerston Follies because in 1870, the Emperor Louis Napoleon, who were building all these from his threat from the ironclad warships, had been defeated in battle by the Prussians, and had sought and was given asylum in England and was in Chislehurst in Kent.
He was living here.
Yeah, so the guns hadn't even arrived on the island, and it was always all obsolete. Okay, so we come out to the other side of the island now. Again, you can see how it's all path around here. There are 21 of these individual casemates that would have housed a 9-inch 12-ton gun. So they're around about 2/3-ish the size of the big guns on the top of the island. We're going to step into this one right here, which is stripped back as it was done originally. And as with a lot of things on the island, all the casemates were adapted over time. Back in the day, this was the floor. You can see the tracer rings on the ground down here where the gun would have traversed left and right. When it was originally built, the arches would have been open both at the back and at either side.
Almost like a gun deck on a ship.
It is, that's what a casemate is. It's simply a technical term for a housing for a gun. These guys here are 10-inch thick iron blast shields.
Really?
Yeah, made in the Millwall Ironworks up in London. So where these arms come out, we would have had rope looped around all of these. If you've got a breeze coming towards you, you don't want hot embers coming in. So as the gun's finally laid, both of these would be shut. You'd have a rope curtain in effect around the gun. And as it recoiled, the bit that's draped around the barrel would just flap back into place. preventing anything coming through.
Very handsome spiral staircase, isn't it?
Yeah, it's absolutely magnificent. And again, you can see here what a commanding position these casemates had around the entrance to Plymouth across there and all the way out to the breakwater fort, combined with the 12-inch 25-ton guns on the top of the island. And that building right there is quite interesting.
Oh yeah.
That's actually a World War II minefield control tower. The original plan for Plymouth was to lay naval minefields out in the Sound, and the plan was that they would be linked by electric cable that would come back from there, so the mines could be detonated remotely.
Yeah.
So we could cut off the back end of the island, prevent enemy submarines getting in this way, but we could let our own ships out.
Clever.
Because it's not contact and it's not magnetised fuses. I've never found out whether they actually laid any. I've got a feeling they didn't, but that's what it was designed for.
So you've got fortification from the Tudors to Second World War.
Second World War, exactly.
From Henry to Hitler.
And all ports in between. So we believe this is part of one of those original 14 batteries that was around the island. But although there looks like what is seats in there at the moment, we're guessing this was originally the shot lockers where they would have stored the cannonball.
Just cannonballs.
Yeah, cannonballs, or the 2 balls with chain on, and the gunpowder. And of course, right up until they stopped using those smaller guns, there would have been a furnace associated with them as well.
Hot, heated shot.
Heated shot. And again, like I say, you meant, all this vegetation is gone. This is not here when it's a fortification. So you have to imagine that gone. Wooden platforms with the guns on the top.
Cannons on there.
Yeah.
And the shot down here. So you've got, well, 17th, maybe 18th century over there. And then, well, looks like 20th century. Is this First and Second World War?
Yeah, this is First and Second World War through here. Yeah, absolutely. So that's a base plate for a 12-pounder gun down there. And these are the tracer rings and the central holding ring for a World War II twin 6-pounder.
Crikey. And that's it. That's the end of the armament. Second World War.
That's the end of the armament. It was ceased to be a military fortification really after World War II. The military were on it until about 55, although they didn't move out completely until 63 when it became an adventure trading place.
So what's the future hold for Drake's Island?
Well, the future is really cool. I'm involved in both the history and the heritage and the conservation, which is all part of phase 1. Because they're really, really important things to preserve. The development itself, it's not to change the skyline. We can only really develop inside the buildings. So you can't build new buildings, you can't build second or third stories onto existing buildings otherwise. And the great thing about for the history side of it is the insides to these are old barracks. They're not stately homes, so there's nothing much to actually preserve on the inside.
For nearly 500 years, the public were pretty much excluded from this island. There were times when they could get on, and this is now in a way returning it to the people of Plymouth.
Yeah, and it's great to be able to share that history with them.